have a repertoire developed, and it's okay to steal things from the past. So when I was doing my PhD, I was doing a lot of transcribing, and I found this figure that Max Roach played, and it goes like this. So that's the figure that's written there on the top of page 3. And he plays that in a solo passage in Salt Peanuts. And there's the bit that goes... And I love that figure, you know. I thought, wow, that's cool. And then I heard Tony Williams play with Miles Davis. On So What? And I thought, at one point I thought, that's that same... He's taken that Max Roach figure and just kind of, rather than alternating it, having it go down and up, he's just kind of gone up. So that started me thinking. There were a few figures that I heard a bunch of drummers play. You'd hear Steve Gadd. Weckl and like Gary Novak played the same thing but going the other way. So it's that Max Roach thing, but in triplets now. They're doing it really quite aggressively. And then, you know what I mean? So like this is still that same Max Roach thing, but treated in a bunch of ways. The last bit of that Max Roach thing where it goes... You hear Tony Williams again. You know, like playing triplets in the triplets. You know, like that's, to me, that's an adaptation of the Max Roach thing. So I figure, well, look, anywhere there's a triplet like that, there's actually all of these different possible ways of revoicing that triplet to adapt it to your own needs, right? So this whole idea of taking figures from the past, from the great Max Roach and from all these guys who people like to talk about a lot. I heard Zach Danziger play something on a Wayne Krantz track once that was sort of like... And a few years later, I heard Vinnie Colaiuta on a drum clinic sort of going... Just stuff like that, just carrying on with a figure like that. There's the great Ted Reed book, Syncopation for the Modern Drummer. And I realized that what Vinnie's playing there in the beginning is basically, the first page of that is just crotchets. But in what I'll show you now, there's this system called filling in the eighth note or quaver gap, which is an idea that I learned from Jim Chapin. And he showed me something that sort of gave me a bit of an insight into perhaps what I was hearing Colaiuta do, that I've heard sort of post-Steve Gadd drummers do. That is a certain way of playing the drums, and it's very appealing to me. So I've sort of reverse engineered what I've heard them do and tried to form a series of rules for myself so that I can understand what they're doing without thinking note for note what it is. If I can think of a system and then just think of some simple rhythms, I can interpret those rhythms using these rules. That's how it works for me. Hopefully it'll work for you too. If you can recognize that in a bar of 4/4, even though there are 4 crotchets written there, they're still the same value as 8 quavers, right? You play little ghost notes for all those spots that don't have a corresponding written note. So for example, 4 crotchets, rather than being this, right, you fill in that gap with a quaver ghost note. So now, and just play hand to hand, right? Now it's automatically just a little more interesting, isn't it? It's just that much more interesting. Okay, if I move right along into these series of rules that I'm talking, and number 2, which has a crotchet rest on beat 1 and then crotchet, 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 it would sound like this. Rather than being 1, 1, you also fill in the rests. If there is a quavers, the 2 quavers, like there's a crotchet rest, so that's worth 2 quavers. So you fill in those quaver rests with 2 ghost notes. So number 2, rather than sounding like rest, right, it'll sound like this: 2, 3, 4. momentum going on. Those ghost notes, we can actually now reinterpret those and say, for every quaver ghost note, I'm going to turn them into 2 semiquavers, and I'm going to play a double stroke with that hand that would play them. So rather than playing this, we'll play this. Right? So number 2 now would sound like this. With the rest on beat 1, it would sound like this. And so on. So you can work it up. So now syncopation actually sounds cool. Now, the idea that I have, this is how I've figured out how Danziger and Colaiuta were doing it. If you go back to number 1 where it says crotchets all the way, why don't I just substitute my right foot for my left hand? So rather than going right, right, left, why don't I go right foot, and keep those ghost notes there? And why do I have to be on the snare drum? Why don't I put my hand on the floor tom here? So now number 1, 4 crotchets can be interpreted like this. And that's what Colaiuta was playing on the clinic. They're just the same syncopated lines, just basically you're just going, just, floor tom to bass drum, and yeah. So back to Vinnie Colaiuta, I would hear him play stuff like. If you transcribe it and you break it down into this schema that I'm talking about, basically you recognize that he's superimposing bars of 3/4 over what is a time signature of 4/4, and the accent pattern simply goes. That's what's behind. That's what's behind that to me. So if you then fill in those gaps. And then now I have these rules where you can, if you've got 3 notes in a beat, you can smooth them out into triplets. It doesn't have to be like quaver and 2 semiquavers. You can actually play triplets. So now this becomes. Sounds a bit more organic, a bit less militant. If you get 2 doubles in a row, you can actually play the second lot of doubles on the bass drum in my rule book. So you go like. And again, now if you just put those accents around the drums, in my mind I'm thinking, and it just generates that figure, The last demonstration I can give you maybe is like to say, like you hear Buddy Rich play the snare drum. Like that undulating, that's all generated by thinking along these lines and just playing the snare drum. All I'm thinking is, we're fleshing it out and with all those doubles and things like that we just talked about. And then so you can just generate some flowing lines, and in playing that, I'm just going da 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 da, and just interpreting it in those ways, So does that help? I hope that helps. Yeah.
You do that like a lot slower.
Yeah, it'd be like. Does that help?
Yeah. And what's the line on top? Da 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 da.
Oh, so I'm just improvising like da 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 da. That's the kind of rhythm that I'm thinking to play that. Yeah. So that's quite a slow one. Da 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 da. Ba ba da doom ga dum, ba-dum. And I'm just learning to fill out those gaps so it actually sounds like we're playing longer notes, like a horn player would.